Hey everyone, did you know that over 90% of you watching right now haven't hit that subscribe button? If you enjoy our content, take a second to subscribe. It's free and it really helps us keep bringing you great stories every day. I remember the way her voice used to sound when she said my name. Soft and certain, like she meant it. Like it mattered. There was music in it once. Before everything shattered like glass beneath a slow and silent fall. Before silence became my only companion. I never imagined it would begin with something so small. A missed call, a laugh too distant, a gaze that lingered elsewhere for a second too long. But the heart notices what the mind tries to dismiss. A man knows when the world he built starts to tremble. Her betrayal did not come with a thunderclap. Number it came with the soft, deliberate drip of cold water onto warm skin. Quiet, repeating, unrelenting. It wore me down. One glance, one lie, one day at a time. And then it all fell apart. I remember the moment she confessed. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She didn't shatter. I did, and yet I made no sound. I stood there, a statue of disbelief, as she unraveled the truth with the calm of someone who had already let go long before I knew I should have. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her eyes searching for a version of me that no longer existed. But it did. And I think I want something different now. Different. That word lodged itself in my chest. Different than me. Different than the man who gave up years and dreams, who'd listened when she cried and held her when the world was too much. I was not angry. I was nothing. And nothing is heavier than rage. I left without a word. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew words had already failed us. They had twisted and curled into promises neither of us would ever keep. In the days that followed, grief took strange shapes. It wasn't the screaming kind. It was quiet, like a fog that never quite lifted. I stopped answering calls. I stopped returning glances. I moved through the world like a ghost wearing my face. People told me I should talk, that healing comes from expression. But some wounds don't bleed loud. Some are stitched up by silence and stitched shut by time. I wandered through my days like a man looking for the edges of himself. I walked streets I had never seen, sat on benches for hours with no thought, just breath. And somewhere, in all that nothingness, something whispered, "Begin again." I started with my hands. They were idle, too long. I found an old notebook from college, back when I used to write poetry, before love became a storm and trust was currency. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded, but I could see the younger version of me in them, hopeful, naive, hungry. I wrote again, not about her, about the stillness of mornings, the way light spills through curtains, the sound of my own breathing when I wake alone. It wasn't much, but it was something. Then I ran, not away, toward, toward the edge of myself, each step a question, each mile a prayer. My muscles ached, but my soul exhaled. I ran until my body became more than grief, until my chest burned with something other than sorrow. I joined a gym, not to transform my body, but to feel it, to remember that I existed outside the ache in my heart. Iron became therapy, repetition became release. I met silence again, this time in the weight room. But now it was the kind of silence that builds, not breaks. The world noticed. Friends I hadn't seen in months reached out. "You look different," they said. But they didn't see the real change. That was happening beneath the surface, far from mirrors and cameras. I wasn't rebuilding who I had been. I was becoming someone new. There were days I missed her. Of course, memory isn't obedient. It drifts in at unexpected hours, mornings usually, when coffee tastes dull and the bed feels too wide. I'd remember the way she laughed at terrible movies, or how she hummed while folding laundry. But I let the memories visit. I didn't chase them away. I let them teach me. About love, about loss, about how sometimes people leave not because you are not enough, but because they're looking for something they cannot name. And that's not your fault. It never was. I read dozens of books on healing, on philosophy, on people who had lost more than I ever could imagine, and still found light. I devoured them, each page a step toward understanding that suffering doesn't define you. What you do with it does. I found peace in the ordinary, the smell of rain, the hum of traffic outside my window, the click of keys under my fingers as I wrote again, really wrote. I published a blog, quiet things, observations, thoughts about pain and purpose. People read, they wrote back. I wasn't alone. Work changed too. I began to show up, not just in presence, but in power. Ideas flowed. Leadership became second nature. I was promoted. Twice. Not because I chased it, but because when you begin to believe in yourself again, the world starts to mirror it. I didn't chase happiness, I chased meaning. And in doing so, happiness came. Slowly. Honestly. There were days I still carried the weight, but I carried it differently. Like armor, not chains. I remember the first time I saw her again. It was nearly a year later, a grocery store. Ordinary as breath. She was there in the produce aisle holding an apple. Her hair was shorter, her smile thinner. She looked up, our eyes met. And in that silent instant, I felt no anger. No pain, just gratitude. For the hurt. For the leaving. For the freedom that heartbreak gave me to become someone better. Not bitter, just better. She smiled. A soft, uncertain thing. I nodded, then walked past. Not out of pride, out of peace. Because I finally understood, closure doesn't come from words. It comes from becoming the person you were always meant to be, had life not broken you open. And I had become him. The days after seeing her were strange. Not painful, not empty, just still. It was like standing at the shore of a sea I once drowned in, and realizing the tide no longer touched my feet. She had become part of my history, like an old photograph, real, worn, and gently faded. No anger lived in me anymore, no hunger for explanations. Just breathe, just life. And life, it kept unfolding. There's a kind of magic in rediscovering yourself after heartbreak, like finding a room in your soul you never knew existed. That's what those months became. Quiet rediscovery. Of music I used to love. Of friends I'd forgotten to call. Of passions that had gathered dust in the attic of my past. I picked up photography. Nothing professional, just a lens, a long walk, and the world. I began capturing small things. A child laughing in the park. An old couple holding hands. Sunlight flickering between branches like it had something to say. Each photo told a story. Each story reminded me that beauty hadn't gone anywhere. I had just stopped noticing it. My mornings changed too. Where once I woke with dread, I now rose with purpose. I'd stretch, drink water, write a single sentence in a journal, sometimes profound, sometimes nonsense, but always honest. Today, I choose peace. It hurts less. She's gone, but I remain. I began volunteering on weekends. Something in me needed to give, not to be noble, but to stay grounded. There's a strange kind of healing that comes from helping someone else. I worked at a local shelter, serving meals, sweeping floors, listening to stories that cracked open your heart and filled it at the same time. There was a man there named Raymond, mid-60s, gray beard, slow limp, eyes that had seen storms. He once told me, "Son, pain either softens you or hardens you. The trick is letting it do the first one." I never forgot that. I started seeing a therapist too, something I once would have called weakness, but it wasn't. It was brave. It was necessary. I walked into that room with years of silence and walked out, slowly, with words again. Words that I'd buried so deep I forgot they were mine. We talked about trust, about abandonment, about the quiet ache of betrayal that doesn't roar but whispers in the back of your mind when you try to love again. She didn't fix me. No one could. But she helped me realize I was never broken, just wounded. And wounds with time and care do heal. Work became more than a job. It became a canvas. I poured myself into it, not as an escape, but as a form of expression. I led teams, launched new projects, mentored younger employees. I saw the way people looked at me differently now, not as someone who had been hurt, but as someone who had risen. I wasn't chasing success. I was building something sacred, self-respect. And then love came again. Not loud, not fiery, but soft, curious, kind. Her name was Mira. We met at a bookstore. She was looking for a novel I had just finished reading. I offered her my copy, said something awkward, and we laughed. That laugh, that moment, it didn't feel like lightning. It felt like home. We started slowly. I was cautious. She was patient. I told her everything, not all at once, but over time in pieces like handing someone fragile glass and trusting they won't drop it. And she held every piece with care. She never asked me to forget the past. She only asked that I not let it define my future. With Mira, I learned that love isn't always grand gestures. Sometimes it's silent support. It's 2 cups of coffee in the morning. It's someone who sits beside you while you process the shadows. She didn't complete me. I wasn't a puzzle missing pieces. I was whole on my own. But she added warmth, color, joy. One night, as we watched the stars from my small apartment balcony, she asked, "Do you believe everything happens for a reason?" I thought of my past, of my ex-wife, of the tears, the silence, the nights I thought I wouldn't make it. And I looked at her, this woman who knew my story and stayed anyway. "I think," I said slowly, "some things break us so we can find the strength to rebuild differently. Not better, not worse, just truer." She smiled and rested her head on my shoulder. There was no need to rush, no need to label, no need to fear. What we had was steady, and sometimes steady is the most sacred kind of love. I still saw my ex-wife now and then. Small city, shared circles. Each time it got easier. We'd nod politely. She seemed different. Quieter, maybe more tired. I didn't know her story anymore, and I didn't need to. One day after a charity event, she approached me. "I heard about your promotion," she said, "and the blog. You're doing well." "Thank you," I replied. And I meant it. There was no tension between us, no bitterness, just the weightless acknowledgement of two people who had once shared a chapter and now stood in completely different books. She looked like she wanted to say more. Maybe she expected me to bring up the past. Maybe she wanted me to tell her I forgave her. But forgiveness doesn't always need an audience. I had already done it. Long ago. Alone. Quietly. When she finally walked away, I felt nothing but peace. Later that evening, I wrote a line in my journal. "Sometimes the greatest revenge is simply living a life that feels like freedom." This wasn't the life I had planned, but it was the life I had earned. And every breath I took in it felt like a victory. Not over her, but over who I used to be. There's a moment, I think, in every healing journey when you look around and realize you made it. Not to a finish line, not to some perfect place, but to yourself. I reached that moment on a quiet Sunday morning. No drama, no applause, just sunlight through the window and the sound of Mira's breathing beside me. I was making coffee when it hit me. I was no longer surviving. I was living. Truly, fully living. Not haunted, not hurting. Whole. I smiled to myself. That small, private kind of smile you don't need to share with the world. The kind that only comes when you've walked through fire barefoot and made it out with your soul intact. It didn't mean the scars were gone. No, they were still there, etched in memory, woven into the fabric of who I had become. But they didn't sting anymore. They were reminders, not weights. I still remembered her, my ex-wife. I always would. She was a part of my story, a necessary chapter, but the pain that once clung to her name had loosened its grip. Now, when I thought of her, it was with compassion. Not longing, not regret, just understanding. We were two people who loved each other once, and then didn't. Life is like that sometimes, and that's okay. Mira and I had grown into something steady. We didn't promise forever, we promised honesty and laughter, and the space to be ourselves, even on the days when we were quiet or tired or unsure. That was enough. She encouraged me in ways I didn't know I needed. When I doubted myself, she reminded me of how far I'd come. When I hesitated, she stood beside me until I was ready. She never tried to fix me. She just walked with me while I learned to fix myself. It was different than before, and better because of it. Professionally, things had continued to flourish. My blog grew slowly but steadily. People began to reach out, not for content, but for connection. Men and women who had gone through their own private losses saying things like, "Your words help me breathe again. I thought I was alone until I read your story." And every time I'd write them back. Not with advice, just presence. Because sometimes the most healing thing we can offer someone is simply to say, "Me too." I was invited to speak at a small conference about personal transformation. I almost said no. I still wasn't used to being seen in that way. Not as broken, but as someone who had built something beautiful from the ruins. But I accepted. And when I stood there in front of that quiet crowd, I didn't talk about success or betrayal or revenge. I talked about silence and how in the darkest hour it became my teacher. I told them how, after she left, I didn't rise in anger. I sank in reflection. How I chose not to destroy, but to rebuild. How I stopped asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and started asking, "What can I grow from here?" When I finished, the applause was soft, genuine, a few tears, a few nods. But what mattered most was the stillness afterward, the kind that only comes when truth has touched something deep. Later that evening, as I walked out into the night air, I saw her again, my ex-wife. I hadn't expected her there, but life, it seems, has its own choreography. She approached with cautious steps, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I listened," she said, "to your talk." I nodded. "You've changed," she added. "Not just outside, in here." She gestured to her chest. "So have you," I replied. And I meant it. There was a pause, not awkward, just full. "I'm happy for you," she said finally. Her voice held no envy, no sadness, only sincerity. "Thank you," I said. And in that moment, I wasn't thanking her just for the words. I was thanking her for everything, for the heartbreak, the departure, the pain. Without all of it, I wouldn't be who I was now. We talked for a few minutes about simple things, life, work, weather, and then, just like that, we said goodbye again. This time, with peace. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. That chapter had closed, not with a slam, but with a whisper. I walked to my car, started the engine, and sat there for a while. Not crying, not aching, just still. Grateful. Grateful for the storms that tore me down. Grateful for the silence that forced me inward. Grateful for the man I had become, not despite the heartbreak, but because of it. And now, looking back, if I could speak to the version of me who stood shattered in that living room the day she said goodbye, I'd say this: hold on, this isn't the end. It's the beginning of the best version of you. You'll cry. You'll ache. You'll question everything. But one day you'll rise. You'll stand taller, speak softer, love deeper. You'll know the power of quiet strength, and when you see her again, you won't need to say anything. Because your peace will say it all.